We've got an initial database design put together. So we're now going to write out a little bit of SQL to interact with a Postgres database. The SQL that we're going to write out is going to create a table called cities, and it's going to have 4 columns associated with it. Now, I'm saying that we're going to work with some database, but you might say back to me, well, Stephen, we haven't even set up a database inside this course yet. Well, that is okay. Let me tell you what we're going to do. For the first little bit of this course, we are going to use an online tool called pg-sql.com. This is a tool that I put together for you specifically for this course. This is a web application that gives you a free Postgres database to run some queries on. The database that you're going to connect to is a very real Postgres database. It gets provisioned on a backend server. We're going to use this database because it's going to be very easy to very quickly run a couple of different queries and understand how to work with Postgres. We are going to install Postgres onto your machine a little bit later on inside the course. The only reason we are not doing that right away is that sometimes installing Postgres can be a little bit painful. And at the start of this course, I want to make sure that you start writing out SQL as quickly as possible. Let's go to pg-sql.com inside of a new browser tab and take a look at how this tool works. Okay, so once you go to that URL, you're going to see a page like this right here. We are going to write out some SQL on the top left-hand side inside this code editor. We'll then click on the Run button, and then we'll see the result of whatever SQL we execute on the bottom left-hand side. As we start to run queries, we'll get a history of all the different SQL that we execute here on the right-hand side. Now, just so you know what is going on behind the scenes here, we have a web application that is connecting to a Postgres database. So in this scenario, we would refer to pg-sql.com as our client. Our client is going to take some SQL, send it off to the database to be executed, and then the database will send us back a response of whatever the result of that SQL was. All right, so back over here, the first little bit of SQL that we're going to write out is going to create that cities table that we just discussed. So we want to create a table called cities. We want to have 4 different columns. For this first little bit of SQL, we're really just going to write it out rather quickly, and then we'll discuss exactly what's going on with it. So let's get typing right away. I'm going to write out create table, and then the name of our table, which in this case is cities. I'll then put in an opening and a closing parenthesis with a semicolon at the very end. Then inside of these parentheses, I'm going to write out the 4 columns that we want to create inside of this table. And after the name of each of these columns, I'm going to write out the type of data that is going to be stored inside of this column as well. So I'm going to write out name, var char 50, and then a comma. Now, you'll recall from the last video, we said that the name column was going to contain a string. And this doesn't really look like anything related to a string at all. We'll discuss what var char means in just a moment. After that, we'll then say that we want our table to also have a country column that is going to store values of type varchar. I'll put a 50 in there as well. And then we'll have a population column that is going to store an integer, and an area column that will also store an integer. Now, before you run this query, I would really encourage you to double check everything you have written out here. Make sure you've got a comma at the end of that line, and that line, but not the last one. Make sure you've got varchar 50. Just double check everything you've got. Once you've got everything written out inside of here correctly, we'll then click on Run on the top left-hand side. And then we can see the result of running that statement down here on the bottom left. It looks like creating the table was successful. Okay, so what did that really do? Well, once again, when we clicked on that Run button, all the SQL you just wrote was sent off to a Postgres database. The database then executed that SQL statement, and it ended up creating a table. So inside of our database, we can now imagine this is what is going on. We have one table inside of our database with the name of cities, and that table has 4 columns. Now we can start to add some information inside this table. All right, now there's a lot more going on with that query than what we just discussed, and you might be curious what this varchar is, what integer is, and so on. Let's take a quick pause here and then really break down the SQL statement in the next video.